Alex Presha outside the courthouse. Bernarda Villalona, former homicide prosecutor, with us once again. Of course, Terri Austin, host and legal analyst of the Law and Crime Network. Alex, let's go straight to you. This has been ongoing now into the third day. Not the first time that we've heard a motion for mistrial. Not the first time we've heard allegations of special treatment. Not the first time that we have heard objections here on what should be used and not used. And the judge clearly getting frustrated. And the jury, I mean, it's like deja vu. They keep coming in and out of the courtroom, whereas this should just be moving forward and taking, it seems like it's taking advantage of very valuable time here. So how are you seeing all of this? And of course, Terri and Bernard, I'll get you to weigh in as well. Just first of all, the frustration on the behalf of the judge is very clear here, Alex.
Well, Kira, you mentioned that this isn't the first time that we've heard someone motion for a mistrial or talk about unfair treatment or preferential treatment during this selection. It's also the first time, it's not the first time that we've seen the judge pretty quickly dismiss these claims, right? And that kind of speaks to some of the frustration that we've seen from the judge in this case. We've got a running count. I believe this is the third time this morning that we've had a significant delay in this case, and it's become a running theme during this trial. At one point, there was a discussion as to whether the detective on the stand right now could even talk about the 911 calls to the area. You know, was it something that he had direct knowledge of, even in his capacity in law enforcement? And so some of this ticky-tacky stuff that's been going back and forth, it was what you heard, some of the frustration from Ahmaud Arbery's mom yesterday, Wanda Cooper Jones, when she said that she thought a lot of these motions and a lot of these sidebars were just delays that were slowing down the trial, but ultimately don't have any lasting impact. But hey, look, on the other side, you have the defense here that they're trying to do their best for their client. And so if that's and we'll have some legal analysts that speak to this as well, but you know, if a strategy is messing up the flow or the rhythm of the prosecution there, you know, maybe that's something that they deem strategic, a strategic advantage. But the other thing to keep in mind is that the jury is consistently going in and out, and you wonder how all this stop and go is playing in their psyche as well.
Terri, what do you think? Is this strategic?
Oh, this is absolutely strategic. We know for a fact that Kevin Goff, who represents William Bryan, is definitely the type of attorney who will object just to interrupt that flow. And the fact that he is moving for a mistrial on a relatively minor issue, particularly since we've already talked about this confrontation issue, the judge thinks in his mind that he's already ironed these issues out. We have the prosecution trying to talk about this video, and the prosecution has already agreed with the defense. Look, I'm only going to show the video as it currently relates to only one witness. I am not going to show it as it might relate to the other witnesses. And so for Goff to be making an objection here or moving for a mistrial because there might have been a comment as far as William Bryan is concerned where he lives, as the prosecution said, that is a relatively inconsequential statement. And in fact, she's already agreed, look, you can call your client, he can talk about it. If he doesn't say what I think is the truth, I can then bring the video back in. For now, I'm not going to show those portions. So clearly, I think we had Detective Marcy on the stand, and Detective Parker Marcy must have said something in connection with Bryan, and that's when this objection and the mistrial motion has been made. And I think it's much to do about nothing. And I definitely think it's a strategic move on the part of Goff, and I think the judge is getting very fed up with it.
Well, it looks like Attorney Goff was going on about why he didn't want Greg McMichael's relationship to Roddy Bryan brought on the record, saying it's not important to the case. But Bernarda, it is important to the case, isn't it?
It's definitely important to the case because it goes to as to why this Bryan actually went with the McMichaels, joined them in their chase. So it's definitely important to the case. But aside from that, even if you were not to use that statement and that statement never came in as to their relationship, the video shows you that, because the surveillance video from the houses went into evidence already, where you saw William Bryan getting in his truck and continuing with the McMichaels. So you have that relationship already in evidence. So there's no prejudice in this case as to that one statement. So let me tell you, in regards to, we know that the majority of these statements were made by video, right? They were made through a body cam. It's present in the body cam. As you can see, during the trial, these attorneys have been very cautious and actually not going to the body cam to play that portion of the video. Instead, what they're doing is that they're using the transcript, because there are a lot of statements that all three of these defendants made that the jury's not going to hear about because of the Bruton issue, where you can't use one defendant's statement that inculpates another defendant that's sitting at the same trial. So that's why we're using the transcripts in order to try to avoid that issue from coming up.
Bernarda, these defense attorneys would really like to not see their clients have to talk in this courtroom, right?
Absolutely. That's the whole goal. You never want to put up your client to testify if you don't have to. So in regards to what they need to do, is that they're trying to get as much as they can in terms of the mind state of their client through the officers that are testifying, or at the very least plant some seeds so they can argue it in closing arguments. At the end, they're going to have to make a decision. Do I have to put my client up to testify on the stand? I will say this. We heard the opening statements of Travis and Greg Michael. You heard so much background information as to each of these defendants. You heard so much information as to what was their mental state. What does that tell you? Is that in order for you to get that evidence in, because remember, opening statements are not evidence, the only person that's going to be able to provide all that background and mental state information and evidence are the defendants. So if they decide not to put their clients on the stand, the prosecution can just go ahead during their closing arguments. You know what you heard during opening statements? Opening statements weren't evidence. More importantly, everything you heard during opening statements, or these portions of what you heard in opening statement, did not come from that witness stand, which means that it is not in evidence.
Alex, what stands out to you with regard to what was brought out by Detective Parker Marcy's testimony so far today, the investigator that's been with Glenn County PD for 10 years?
Well, again, we've heard the prosecution try to chip away at the idea that Satilla Shores had a streak in crime, right?
What page is that?
That questioning of Gregory McMichael, where he says, not that I recall, I don't think this guy has stolen anything, or if he did, it was early in the process, referring to Arbery going on to Larry English's property, that open construction site where Larry English was building a home. And we've heard the prosecution talk before about multiple people going through that area, about kids jumping off Larry English's dock into the water, and that he was worried about liability. And so here we have this statement in testimony from the detective today, talking about how Gregory McMichael did not know or didn't think that Arbery had stolen anything, or if he did, it was earlier on in the process. But he keeps going over there and again and again to that damn house. Also, we heard Gregory McMichael jump to conclusions here about a missing gun from his son Travis, saying that he believed that Arbery was the one that stole it. He didn't know why, or he didn't have any concrete evidence to it, but for whatever reason, he believed that this man that he's seen in surveillance at the Larry English property was somehow related to a missing firearm from his son. And so, again, that just kind of gets to this idea that there were a series of assumptions and driveway decisions that led to Arbery's death.
Alex, what about, too, this back and forth that Marcy was talking about, Investigator Marcy, when he was asking Greg McMichael these questions about, were you communicating with Arbery? Were you giving any type of warning? And then there was that one moment where we heard from the transcript, Greg McMichael saying to Arbery, when telling him to stop, stop or I'll blow your effing head off. We both kind of took a pause. That stood out to you as well.
It was intense, right? So that, in that questioning, in that testimony from Detective Marcy, it made clear that, well, number one, it seems like that this was a pursuit by the McMichaels of Arbery, that this wasn't just some trying to corner him for questioning and hold him for the authorities, right? I mean, this was an active chase, which is something that we've heard the prosecution say throughout this case, that these were decisive choices by the McMichaels to go after Arbery. They say that Arbery was under attack during this, and so whenever you hear that language, stop or I'll blow your expletive head off, and then also the stop, GD, stop. As he's aiming, he doesn't fire, but he's aiming, that gets to this picture that the prosecution is painting, that the McMichaels were out to get Arbery.
Okay, so Terry, just to play devil's advocate, there has been this talk of that the defendants in no way, shape, or form tried to get Arbery to stop, that they didn't say, stop, we're about to make a citizen's arrest, you are being charged with burglary, using that formal talk of how you are supposed to approach a suspect if you're about to make a citizen's arrest. As ugly it is with the profanity and the way they were saying it and yelling, could that in any way be justified by the defense that our clients were trying to stop him, he wasn't listening, they were doing the proper protocol to try and get him to stop so they could retain him or hold on to him until the police got there?
You better believe that's exactly what we are going to hear during the closing arguments. They are going to say, what else can you say? Maybe the magic words weren't used. Stop, we're making a citizen's arrest because we believe that you've committed some sort of crime, whether that's a misdemeanor or a felony. I think the argument is going to be they were trying to stop him because they thought he committed a crime. And to your point, I'm playing devil's advocate here, and they said what they needed to say in the heat of the moment. They're going to argue that many times Arbery had been at that home, that they haven't been able to catch him up to now. They want to know what he's doing there, and this is why they are following him in their trucks, and they just want to stop and have a conversation. I want to talk to you. Those words were used, and they weren't trying to trap him or gun him down at all. So I think that's exactly what the argument's going to be. And the flip side of that, of course, is you still did not have to kill him. Even if he was committing a crime, and there's been no evidence to that thus far, he didn't have to die on that day. You didn't have to use lethal force at that time. You didn't have to pin him down with your cars so he had no way to escape. You could have tried later to call 911. And by the way, the argument for the defense is going to be, but we tried that, it didn't work, so we really wanted to get him this time. So I think they are going to go back and forth on those two arguments as to whether or not this really was, under the statute at the time, a citizen's arrest.
All right, so considering what Terry just said, Bernarda, as a former prosecutor, let's say that's the way the defense goes and says, okay, it may have been profane and not really the way, it wasn't respectfully, Arbery wasn't respectfully approached about this was a citizen's arrest was about to happen. As a former prosecutor, how would you go back at the defense on that?
So I'll go back in regards to the citizen's arrest and how they're going to downplay of they were trying to stop him, that, the words, they may not be nice, but they were trying to stop him. Either way, actions speak louder than words. So regardless of the words that you use, what were your actions? What were your actions? You're pointing a handgun. You're pointing a shotgun. You're chasing him down with 2 pickup trucks. You're cornering him. You're doing U-turns. You're blocking him. In fact, at one point, Ahmaud Arbery ends up in a ditch. Those actions speak much louder of whatever it is that you were trying to say you were trying to do. And I just wanted to take it a step further, because we're always talking about how the defendants here were trying to execute a citizen's arrest, and this is exactly why that law got repealed. In regards to Ahmaud Arbery, why would I stop for you? Who are you for me to stop what I'm doing to answer questions? You are not law enforcement. You are not a police officer. So if I were Ahmaud Arbery, I'm not stopping for you, especially when I'm looking at 2 pickup trucks with 3 white men, with one of the pickup trucks having a Confederate flag plate in the front of it. And then I'm looking at the weapons too. Come on, man.
All right, let's talk about the body cam. We're seeing a lot of body cam, cell phone video now. Today, we saw another officer and his body cam. Alex, let's go back to that and what we saw today, and this new body cam footage from Jeff Brandeberry, who has been a police officer there for about 4.5 years. He responded to the shots fired, that call to the scene the day of the shooting. Walk us through what we saw and heard today and what stood out, and then we'll get Bernarda and Terri to weigh in on this body cam we're seeing for the first time.
Yeah, well, what was interesting about the testimony from Officer Jeff Brandeberry is he was charged with interviewing Greg McMichael on the scene. And so it's basically our first time hearing from one of these defendants immediately after this shooting takes place. And you hear, according to Brandeberry's testimony, how Greg McMichael is processing this. He talks about how even after the shooting, he thought that Ahmaud Arbery may have still been a threat, may have still been armed, because the way he fell face down, he had his arm under him. And so McMichael talks about going up and pulling his arm out to make sure that he doesn't have a weapon concealed. And in all of this playing out without some sort of aid being administered, or at least calls for help. He also talks about how Arbery had, these dreads, or whatever you call them, short dreads, and that kind of indifference to Arbery as a person gets back to the crux of this case, which is about race and how he was perceiving Arbery as someone whose life may not have been valuable. And then there was also this moment where you hear him say, "To be honest with you, if I could have shot myself, I would have." And you and I were talking about this, Kira, over text. It was something that really kind of stood out. He talks about, Greg McMichael, that is, talks about going inside of his house to get his .357 because he doesn't leave things to chance. And again, it gets back to this overall idea of, which was pointed out just before, look, you have a threat in your neighborhood, and you see that threat somewhere running down the street. Instead of calling 911, you think this person might be armed. Instead of calling 911 and having the authorities handle this for you, you decide to arm yourself and then go chase a person you believe that might be armed. And that's something that the prosecution is going to really kind of pick at. And it's also something that you'd expect the jury to question as well. And so that was one of the big takeaways from today.
And Terri, what do you think of that takeaway? Because that was a moment where we all kind of stopped and went, whoa, when you heard that's what Greg McMichael had said, that if I could have taken a shot, I would have taken it. How damning is that?
I think it's very damning, and it goes back to the issue that we were talking about earlier, that in fact, they weren't just trying to make a citizen's arrest. They wanted to get this guy. He went in to get his handgun, and knowing already that his son has a rifle, and the fact that they are saying to the police when they're being interviewed, yeah, I would have shot him myself if I could have, indicates just what was going on at the time it was happening. They were revved up, and that's one of the things we heard during the testimony today, that in fact they were really revved up. Greg said, you know, he was excited, and that's what the officer could see, that he was excited. And the fact that they got all caught up in this chase, no matter what happened, they were going to get Ahmaud Arbery on that day, even if it meant that they had to corner him and shoot him down. They weren't going to let him get away. And there's no question that Greg said during that interview, during that video cam, that he doesn't know if Arbery has a weapon. He doesn't know if Arbery has done any sort of mischief in the neighborhood. He didn't see it happen. And we know all of this information. So for them to corner him the way they did, to chase him down, he had nowhere else to go. And we know that they had in their minds, and that's one of the things that the prosecution is going to have to show here. Obviously, the burden is on the prosecution to show exactly what it was as far as the intent was concerned. The intent was, in my opinion, based on all of these actions, to get Arbery no matter what, and to not only stop him, not only make an arrest, but to stop him from ever coming back again.
Bernarda, we have a question for you. We were trying to hammer this out this morning, and maybe you know from your experience as a prosecutor, there was a moment during Jeff Brandeberry's testimony talking about Gregory McMichael talking to someone there in the neighborhood after the shooting had occurred. He was talking about this conversation, and that Gregory McMichael was talking about this guy, referring to Ahmaud Arbery, and that he's always walking on the road. He's no shuffler. He's an a-hole. This is what Gregory McMichael said. No, I don't know. And then he said, referring to Arbery, you know, he was hooked up. What does that mean? He was hooked up.
So in regards to what does it mean in terms of what Greg McMichael was trying to say about Ahmaud Arbery and saying that he was hooked up, he's insinuating that Ahmaud Arbery was under the influence of narcotics, that he was under influence of drugs. So that's why he was reacting in the way that he was reacting about Arbery. But either way, what does this show us? Remember, throughout the entire testimony of this officer, Gregory McMichael is calling Ahmaud Arbery all different types of names. A-hole, he was hooked up, while the body of Ahmaud Arbery is only 20, 30 feet away from him. And this is how he's referring to a man who just lost his life, a man that at no point was armed, a man that at no point provoked you into using deadly force against him, and a man that you did not know that he committed a crime. So in terms of everything that Greg McMichael was saying, it was all derogatory terms that he was using about Ahmaud Arbery, which is very frustrating because till this day, I have yet to see any one of these defendants show any emotion or remorse for taking away the life of another human being. You didn't see it on that day by the way that they reacted and the statements that they made, and you have yet to see it to this day.
Point well made. And Alex, also to this point, and after all this testimony so far, the lack of evidence that Arbery committed a crime is really strong.
Well, and not just that. In testimony today, we've heard some of the defendants admit as such, right? Whether it be Gregory McMichael saying, look, you know, Arbery has been the one that's been going through, you know, responsible for all these break-ins, and then saying, well, I've seen him on camera just, you know, 1 or 2 times at a house, and then later admitting that, well, you know, I don't think that he's actually ever taken anything, haven't actually witnessed him taking anything, but he's been going over to this same house repeatedly. Or even in the accusations that maybe he was somehow responsible for his son, Travis McMichael's missing pistol, but not having any evidence that backs that up. Again, you know, there are these assumptions that appear to be made, and that's something that the prosecution has laid out repeatedly, that these assumptions have been made on the case of Gregory and Travis McMichael and William Roddy Bryant, that Arbery was responsible and did something, but there's so far no evidence to prove that point. And you know, the last piece of this, and I think it's one of the biggest pieces of this case, is that fact that Arbery was unarmed the day that he was shot. And again, I mean, you hear the defense talk about the possibility of Arbery being a threat, even after he's laying face down in the street. That continues to be something that they say their clients were fearful for their safety, and still yet there's no indication, no evidence that Arbery was ever armed.
Terri, do you want to add to that?
The thing I will add to that, and it concerns me, is the fact that all of these officers appeared on the scene. Now, clearly EMT came at some point, but not only was Gregory McMichael and Travis McMichael and William Bryan not focusing on Ahmaud Arbery, but the police officers as well. None of them gave him any sort of CPR. None of them attempted to save his life. And we know for a fact, of the 5 officers, he was at least alive when 1 or 2 of them arrived, because one of them testified they heard the breath. And I think even today we heard the fact that there was some breathing going on, and none of them attempted. Now, of course, they all have different jobs. We know Dugan was there. He was the second on the scene. You know, he said he was trying to make sure it was secure. We know Ramos was there. She was just investigating. Minshew, I'm not really sure why he didn't offer. You know, he was the first one on the scene. He said he heard the death breath, but he heard breathing. And even with Brandenburg and Marcy, those officers, perhaps it's because the EMT was there. But my overall concern and observation is not one of them, none of the 3 defendants, none of the officers attempted in any way, shape, or form to give any sort of assistance to Ahmaud Arbery, who was dying 20 feet away from them on the street. Granted, we haven't heard from the EMT yet, but these officers were there. They had an opportunity, and clearly the concern was just about these defendants and how were they doing, and are you okay, and go and talk to whomever you want. And that's a concern as far as society is concerned, that the police are operating in this fashion and reacting the way they did.
So, Bernarda, your take on this, because there are a number of different accounts here. We did hear Officer Minshew say yesterday that when he arrived there on the scene, it looked like Ahmaud Arbery had already bled out. But also he said he heard the death rattle, which is exactly what Terri was talking about, that last breath. Do you think, by everything that you have heard thus far, including seeing those just gruesome pictures from the scene when Sheila Ramos, the crime scene investigator, went through her testimony yesterday, showing just the size of the hole in his chest and in his wrist, and do you believe that Arbery's life could have been saved by Minshew, the first officer on the scene, maybe even one of the defendants, Travis McMichael? He had training from the Coast Guard. He had training from a weapons institution. Do you think his life could have been saved, knowing what you know to this point?
So we're still waiting to hear from the coroner or the medical examiner to determine what was actually the cause of death. But more importantly, what you're going to hear from the coroner or the medical examiner, however they call it in Georgia, is that the medical examiner is going to provide you with the trajectory. What does that mean? The medical examiner is going to tell you that once the bullet entered the body, what path did it take? What organs did it hit? And that's going to be important for the jury to find out, to determine at that point, you know, it's a homicide. So there is no doubt that it's a homicide. But what she's going to emphasize and what's important, because it was a fatal wound, I'll tell you for a fact, there is no way, even if there was a surgeon at the scene, even if you could have gave him blood transfusion at the scene, no one would have been able to save Ahmaud Arbery's life, because the wound was so fatal and because he just lost so much blood at a quicker pace. I will tell you what exacerbated why he lost so much blood. because there's an internal wound, as he is running, he's causing his body to pump even more blood and bleed out even quicker because he's actually moving. But what's the main concern here is that no one used humanity in terms of, let me check on this human being and see if he's alive, to see if there's anything I can do. I know that there's nothing that could have been done, but that's based on me being a homicide prosecutor for 10 years and dealing with medical examiners and doctors and going through autopsies and watching autopsies. But those officers didn't know that. Aside from that, you're not going to hear that any of the McMichaels or Brian, that any of them went to go check to see if he was alive or to check for a pulse. You're not going to hear that. What did you hear from Greg McMichael? He said he went to check and pulled his arm from underneath him to see if he had a weapon. Not if he was alive. Not if he was alive. And that is a shame right there.
Alex, Terri, and Bernarda, appreciate your insight and helping us guide our way through this gavel-to-gavel coverage.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.